what I want to share with you today is to you as internal practitioners, from an internal practitioner who learned the hard way. My approach to this challenge of from unconscious bias to conscious actions is to stop talking about gender equality if you want gender equality. Is to stop talking about unconscious bias if you want to mitigate unconscious bias. So some of you might be thinking, what is she talking about? Because we actually came here to talk about this. I don't mean here at this kind of events, but I mean in our workplaces. And I'll return to why I'm saying that. My point is we need to design. We need to design behaviors, we need to design structures, we need to design cultures to mitigate unconscious bias and promote gender equality. And we can do that with techniques from behavioral economics, anthropology, psychology, and neuroscience. I call these techniques inclusion nudges. Inclusion nudges are practical interventions that's like a non-intrusive mental push of the unconscious mind. These have been proven to mitigate unconscious bias and promote inclusive behavior that will stick. On top of having seen significant behavioral changes, it has been so much easier to be a change agent and the messenger of gender equality and inclusiveness and get buy-in and real commitment from people. And I haven't always worked this way. I swear to God, I have done my share of talking. As Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity, you are invited in at a lot of meetings with some PowerPoint slides and a business case with some data, some research, some really heavy arguments for the rational mind, and I have done my share. I have done my share of talking as a consultant for the Institute of Human Rights, working with public, private companies, helping them get to the business case, ensuring that we are honoring human rights in the labor market by focusing on the resources, the business case of this. So I knew everything about what to do, but the problem was that I was really speaking to the wrong part of the brain. And by that I mean, to the point that Femi was making, we have two systems in the brain. We have a system 2, which is the rational mind. As Femi said, about 5%, some say 10%. And then we have the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is the one doing our behavior. System 1, the automatic thinking, where the biases, the feelings are, the fear, the flight and attack mode, should I stay, is it safe for me to stay here, all that going on in System 1. System 1 is the one doing our behavior, so if we keep talking to System 2, it's not going to change anything. We can talk as much as we want. People will get it. They will rationally understand it. It doesn't mean that we do it. And I think that's where one of the main challenges is. So I knew this. Being an anthropologist, having studied psychology, I knew this. But still, I kept talking to the rational mind, relying on good intentions and willpower of people to change this. And that's the essence of this. The whole dilemma between knowing things, getting it, and doing it. So even though I knew what to do, I was still doing the wrong thing. Even though when we know what the right thing is, we can still do the wrong thing. Like Femi said, we can know about our biases and we can still keep acting in a biased way. It was one experience, one Tuesday morning in 2011 that fundamentally changed the way I work. And I stopped talking. I have not presented one business case since, and I've never seen as many behavioral changes and systemic and cultural changes as I have since I stopped talking. And I'll tell you what happened that morning. I have been invited in as a global head of inclusion and diversity in a big global company to present a business case and the 10-year strategy for how to create a more inclusive organization. I had been given 45 minutes on the agenda. You know how much, that's really a long time, right? You know that. Okay, so 15 minutes in, the CEO goes, just stop. And you know there are different kinds of stop in that situation as well, right? There's the stop, let's stop to clarify, I need some more examples. Or there's the stop, oh, this is really interesting, unconscious bias, oh, that's interesting. We should really, I would really like to understand this a bit better. And then there is the stop, that's just the full stop, right? Just stop and leave, basically. We don't want to hear anything more. Okay, so 15 minutes in, this is a full stop. And what he said next, I am grateful for today, but at the time made me consider this as the biggest failure of my work life. Because what he said was this: this is simply too complex. We do not want to understand this intellectually. Stop talking to us. Believe me when I tell you that we believe in this with our hearts. We want a diverse and inclusive organization. We know this is a must-have in the 21st century. We believe in this. Get us moving. The 10 of us in here are ready to run. You don't have to continue. Thank you. So you could imagine the pressure on my shoulders walking out that room. At this point in time, as Femi said, my brain was supposed to have shut down, been in complete survival mode, been ready to just run. I don't know where this came from, but I turned around the door and I looked at him and I said, I just need to understand my mandate. You want me to get everybody in this organization to run, but you don't want to know where you're going to run or why you're running? And he said yes. And I said, well, then it can take a really long time before you meet. And he goes, well, things like this and changes like this takes a long time. It's okay. And that is probably the biggest mandate I have ever gotten, because then I knew that I had time to make this kind of changes. If you have to get 19,000 people to be inclusive overnight, that might be too much to ask. And by the way, we're going to cut your budget and you don't get a team. That forces you to be very creative. And out of that comes inclusion nudges. So, what happened after that was, this is what he said to me. After that, I started searching. I started searching for other ways to do this. If I had to change the way I work, how would I do it? And failing, falling, getting hurt, and getting up again and learning from this is something I learned the hard way playing basketball in the States. Like if you fall, like literally fall and hurt yourself on the court, you get up and you keep playing. If you don't, you're off the team. And there's plenty of players on the bench that want to take your spot on the court. So I got up, I licked my wounds. I spent a couple of months trying to come up with really good solutions or good reasons this happened. You know that feeling? And they're not very pretty, and they're not very realistic either, right? And you also know what we do as women. We also start doubting ourselves and being like, am I just completely stupid and incompetent? So I brushed that off and said, what if he had not put me down? What if what he had done that day was guiding me? What if he was really being an authentic leader that dared to be honest and guide me? What was he saying? He really just said, we want this to happen. Help us do it. Don't make it difficult. Get us to do it in an easy way. On my search, on my path to searching for this, I found this brain analogy by Jonathan Haidt. He says the unconscious mind, the two systems, is like an elephant and its rider. And that made a significant difference for me. He says the system 2, the one that gets the business case, is only a small rider on top of a big, heavy, 6-ton heavy elephant. The elephant is the doer. The elephant is the one you have to appeal to. And the interesting part about the elephant is emotional. It could care less about rational arguments, data, and a business case. It doesn't appeal to it. It's not making it move. And the rider cannot move it if it's not motivated to move. And the interesting part is behavioral economics have shown us that we can get the elephant to move without talking, convincing, threatening, promising a bonus. So I made a pledge to myself that day. I said, I will never bring in a business case, and I haven't done so. But it wasn't, I think maybe, I had to have a few other experiences, but when I had those, I really started getting it. And then I looked back, and that was a painful process. Imagine this, considering yourself to be quite competent in your work and have to look back 10 years and admit to yourself that you failed 90% of the time. You didn't get to see the behavioral changes that you thought you were seeing because you just made yourself see something to have this self-image of being competent. What I saw was when I actually succeeded in making sustainable changes for gender equality and inclusiveness, I had appealed to the elephant. The interesting pattern that emerged to me was that the majority of the time I had actually talked to the rider. So a couple of months later, I was invited in again by the executive team to present a business case on some PowerPoint slides with a one-pager. So I decided not to do that and stuck to my pledge. So what I did was I had to present to them the data from the employee engagement survey showing that it was going the wrong way with harassment, bullying, discrimination. And that's just a theme that nobody really wants to touch. It's kind of infected, and nobody really wants to talk about it. So what I did, instead of talk about it, was I interviewed 40 people who had experienced this in the organization. And as I was interviewing them, I felt pain, and I felt disgust, and I felt empathy. And I knew I had to get the executive leaders to feel this because they were the ones who had to change some culture. They had to role model this in the business. So I invited the executives in to their own executive management team meeting conference room, and I had put all these quotes from these people and their stories in first-person quotes in big speech bubbles, and I had decorated all the walls in the executive management conference room. And they were ready to sit down, and they were very busy. You know how they come in and they're like, oh my God, go on, okay, quickly, okay, do it. And they're like, okay, this is interesting. So they were walking around and they were reading these, and not at one point they turned to me as a facilitator of this. They looked at each other, and I set a criteria for myself. If they just read 4 of these, I'm happy. Just need to hear 4 real stories about how this feels to go to work here. They read all of them, and they started speaking together. And I still get the shivers thinking about this day, because they were speaking elephant language. I feel disgusted that this is going on in my organization. I feel so sad for him that he had to go through this. I cannot believe she said that to him. I cannot believe he said that to her. Things like this. And one of them even said, I feel nausea. And that's not just a figure of speech. It's actually what happens when we experience other people being socially excluded or treated bad. We activate the part of the brain where the feeling of physical pain is, or empathy. And that's what I needed, because that's how you get people to change behavior. And they really seriously started role modeling this. We did more. We humanized the numbers. Instead of saying 15%, we said this is 3,452 people in your organization, really appealing to that feeling of we are in this together. These are my people from my tribe. Appealing to that similar other feeling we have. And we reversed the business case. Instead of talking about what we would gain for fixing this, we showed them what we were losing, because the elephant is twice as miserable losing something as we are gaining the exact same thing. It's called loss aversion bias. So we triggered that. We showed data that when one person experiences this, they lose 30% of their decision-making power. That hurt. An executive knowing this sucks. One person in a team of 8 experiences this, it affects the entire productivity of the team. It drops. This is painful. So the whole conversation around this completely changed. It was no longer a discussion about definitions and all kinds of silly things. It had nothing to do with behavioral changes. And we immediately after started seeing changes in behavior and local initiatives, and they were really just riding this. They were not waiting for a corporate initiative, they were taking action. Another example is you can ask managers, how do you recruit? Well, we use objective screening criteria. So we look at their potential and their position profile, and we screen them objectively. And you can try to convince them that they're very biased in that process. But you can't convince them to change their behavior. So what we did was we designed a fictional CV and a narrative about a candidate based on 8 real people in the organization. We made a position profile, and then we made 8 different versions of the same CV and narrative. The only thing we changed was the picture, the gender, the skin color, and the name. And they each had one to rate. We didn't do this in unconscious bias training. We didn't call this inclusive leadership training. This was just regular leadership training or training of recruiters. This was about making good decisions, hiring the best qualified person. So they rated them, and it was an eye-opener for them when they saw that they used the entire scale from 0 to 100%. How likely are you to hire this person on a scale from 0 to 100%? They used the entire scale across these 8 candidates. The inclusion nudge is when you tell them that these candidates are 100% identical, except for the picture, the name, the gender, the skin color. This is a huge eye-opener for them, that they were not making objective screenings of them, but they were affected by a picture. But we didn't tell them, we showed them. So you ask them, you ask the writer, what's your intentions? What is your self-perception? I'm objective and I'm fair. And then you show them what the elephant is really doing. And that gap is what we anthropologists are studying. We study what you say you do or think you do and what you actually do. And when you can see that gap, the unconscious mind is actually able to adjust just a little bit. And sometimes you need to redesign the structures, and we did that a lot as well. But I don't have so much time to give you a lot of examples, so this is just a taster. What was interesting too was another pattern emerged, was that the woman named Khalifa Mohammed was always rated lower than the woman named Sonia Young. And this fits the global stereotypes that Asians are perceived as more smart and Muslims are not. So this was not about women or men or somebody against the other group. This was just about showing them biases, but talking less about bias, but simply showing them. So one day I came across Lisa Kapinski's example of how she did this. And Lisa, I didn't know, but I was just reading a summary from a network meeting. And what she did immediately caught my attention because it was very similar to what I had been doing. She had to convince the executive management group and the leadership groups in the organization where she was working, multinational, that the women were not being promoted because they were not visible in informal and formal networks. The problem was there was a lot of resistance to implementing a sponsorship program. Sponsorship is very different from mentoring program. Mentoring program is often about, teaching the women how to be a part of the political system and building their skills, kind of a little bit like fixing the women. A sponsorship program is much more the executives go in and they advocate for women to make sure they're visible for their great performance, make sure they're visible in those informal networks where they're being appointed from to the next position. But there was resistance because the executives said, listen, we are doing this in a fair way. Everybody's welcome in the network. And she's like, okay, I give up on the writer. I'm gonna give something to the elephant. So what she did was this. She took 130 pictures of the 130 people in the talent pool and the high potential pool who were ready for the next position. She put the pictures up. She came into the meeting. She said, listen, just call out the names of the people you recognize. And they got into this great competition and calling out the names. And she changed the slide. And she said, just continue. Who do you know here? They called out just a few names. She said, why you stop? We don't know them. We don't recognize them. It's like, okay, what do you notice about the picture? Well, they're all women. That was an eye-opener for them. Instead of presenting the business case with the data from the HR system, she got them to get the business case themselves. And now you're talking to that elephant. They said, okay, we get this. This is bad. What a waste of talent. We even invested in these women. What do we do? Sponsorship programs, she said, and they all volunteered. Within 3 months after, 2 of these women were promoted. It had never happened at that pace in that organization. So, I'm in New York a couple of months after having read this example. I meet up with Eric, completely by coincidence, Eric was introduced to me the day before I left. I never met that man in my life. So we're talking, and he says, listen, that's really interesting, those inclusion nudges. I have only met one other person who works like you. You should meet her. Her name is Lisa Kapinski. So there she was again. Out of the 7 billion people in this world, within 2 months, I come across her name. So for me, that was an omen. That was a sign. I was like, okay, I need to meet her. So I met with her, and we worked together for 6 months virtually. We'd never met each other. And we merged our approaches because we had both been searching to find a pattern, what worked. And what worked was this. We started calling it inclusion nudges. Not to go out and communicate about this, really, but for us to systematically keep doing what we found to be working as internal change agents. And this is what we found. If you can get the elephant to feel the need to change, the unconscious mind, it's much more motivational than just relying on people getting it. If you can redesign the processes, we have so many organizational processes already, so many procedures, recruitment process, people calculation processes, talent processes, innovation processes, lean processes. There are so many things out there. So if we don't interrupt the business, but just slide this in as undercover agents, we redesign the systems, we don't intrude, we don't call it anything. It's just regular good decision making. What happens then? And we saw significant changes. And then a reframing. Because I seriously think we're stuck in the wrong discourse. Where gender equality, for some bizarre reason, gender equals women, and empowerment equals fixing the women. We will never get gender equality, and we will never get the benefits out of using and applying and leveraging differences between all the people in the world if we keep talking about that. This is just a means to getting to something bigger. So how can we reframe the discourse without talking? This is one way that I did it. Let me just share you one last example with you. Shift the focus away from women and to what we try to achieve with this. Better performance, more innovation, better well-being, whatever it is. Link it, like Aviva said, link it to your business strategy. But what we did, we changed the targets. We said, instead of saying 30% women in leadership, we said a high-performing team should be composed in a specific way, maximum 70% of the same gender. Now it's about everybody, now it's about performance. So that's what we did, and I never met any resistance on this. And I worked in the dairy industry, and that's conservative. Don't quote me on that. So out of all this, we said, okay, so everybody's pulling their hair in our international networks and saying, okay, this is crazy. We do unconscious bias awareness training and we don't see the changes. What should we do? We said, we are sure you have done something. You just don't know it because it probably happened to you by coincidence because that's how it started for us. But if you share one example of something, of these little interventions that we call inclusion nudges, where you get that elephant moving, if you share one example, we will share back with you, free of charge, all the examples we collect worldwide. Today we have 70 of these inclusion nudges, and they are all in that book, written out by practitioners on how you can copy their success. Very simple interventions, but some of them are a bit complex to design. And it's not just something you come up with. You use the principles, you get your data right, you use the research. So it's sharing, it's a global community of sharing now, and you are welcome to join in. This is really to make sure that we do more of the stuff that works. I then stepped out as global head of inclusion and diversity, and I had founded in 2013 this organization I call Move the Elephant for Inclusiveness, a non-for-profit global sharing based on reciprocity. You give, you get. The entire surplus of that organization is used to give discount gifts, do a lot of pro bono work for the UN and the World Economic Forum, and everybody who's a part of this chips in on this, whether they want to or not. And it's interesting because I had a group of people lining up saying, you can't live of your passion and you can't live of having a nonprofit. You can. this is great. I love what I do because everybody keeps sharing back. This gives a lot of good energy, and you get happy from giving. And what's interesting is, as much as I believe in coincidence, I think I've proven by now that majority of this happened by coincidence, I believe more that we can make progress in gender equality and inclusion if we don't rely on coincidence, but we do this more systematically in our organizations and empower each other to do this right. And as much as I believe in learning the hard way, I believe that it's not worthwhile, that everybody has to learn the hard way. So it's out there for you to just go and copy the success of the others. So I really, really encourage you, let's shift this paradigm. Make sure that inclusion is the norm, and we make it easier for people to be inclusive, and that we talk less and design more. So thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tinna. I am absolutely astonished.